Hello YouTube. In the past year I've tested countless phones, but the one I keep coming back to is the Vivo X100 Pro. You've seen in all my camera comparisons how well these cameras perform, and that's the reason I keep putting my SIM card in it and carrying it with me everywhere I go. Now I've finally got my hands on its successor, the Vivo X200 Pro, and the main thing I want to know is it worth the upgrade if you already have the Vivo X100 Pro? So today we're going to compare the video performance, the photo performance, and everything else. So get comfy and we'll take a look. Alright, so starting off with a look at the hardware of these two phones. Obviously we've got my old reliable X100 Pro in black on the left and the shiny new X200 Pro in titanium on the right. Overall the designs are quite similar. We've obviously got a big centrally placed camera bump in the middle. SIM card slots in the same place on both. Buttons are still in the same place on both. We've still got a flash unit up on the right. The cameras are now in a slightly different position, but otherwise quite similar overall. Thankfully they've got rid of that cringy text that says extreme imagination on the X100 Pro, as well as the professional photography written on the top. I don't think that's going to be in focus. Maybe you can see it just there. But the biggest change with the X200 Pro is it's much less curvy. You got much thicker, more iPhone-like side rails, less of a curve on the rear panel, and much less of a curve on the screen on the front. The camera bump is also a lot more substantial. This is a chunky phone and you'll definitely feel it bulging in your pocket. It's a price you have to pay for nice cameras. Overall, I'm a big fan of the new design. I've never been a huge fan of curved edge displays. I just hate the accidental touches you get and the odd reflections it can cause, as well as color shifting at the very edge. For that reason, I've always said flat screens are better, but as I've said in other videos, these micro curves that you're getting on a lot of phones now have really won me over. You can see what I mean if I hold the phone up like that. Basically, the entire screen that you interact with is flat, and just the bezels at the very edge of the display are curved, and it's symmetrical on all sides. So it's the same on the top and the bottom as it is on the sides. It kind of looks like an overfilled glass of water. Oppo's adopted this. I think Honor have with the Magic 7 series, and Vivo as well. So all the Chinese brands seem to be doing the same thing this year, and it's a welcome change from me. The fingerprint scanner's changed, now an ultrasonic unit on the X200 Pro, which is a big improvement over the optical unit you get on the X100 Pro. And in terms of brightness, you do get a higher maximum output on the X200 Pro. Don't know if it's going to come across at all on the camera, but it is a brighter display and I can see it with my eyes here. Yeah, if you're worried about competing with sunlight, you should be well covered with the X200 Pro. These are both global versions, so they're both running FunTouch OS and they're both on FunTouch OS 15, so there's no real major differences in the software. They're both fully up to date. Both have circle to search, so yeah, you can quickly look up things like that. And both have Gemini as the default assistant. Obviously I don't actually... Try setting up. Of course that was going to happen. But yeah, Gemini's the default assistant on both. Circle to search is built in. You got the same feature set. Both have the new humanistic street photography camera built in as well. Honestly, I think is a little bit gimmicky, but you can save presets in there, which is nice. So yeah, overall software basically the same. Main difference is going to be the speed. The Dimensity 9400 is a much faster chip. So the X200 Pro is a lot better for gaming, if you care about that. But otherwise, both still feel snappy and fast, and you're not really going to be disappointed there. When it comes to the cameras, I'm not going to walk you through all the different sensor sizes. I'll put them on screen right now. Main difference is that you get a 1-inch type sensor on the X100 Pro, slightly smaller 1/1.2-inch sensor on the X200 Pro, but it's a newer sensor with better light gathering capabilities, and combined with new autofocus algorithms, it should give it a run for its money. The telephoto has a much larger sensor. It's a 1/1.4-inch unit, compared to just 1/2.51 inch on the X100 Pro. However, the reach has changed. It's like 100mm equivalent on the X100 Pro and an 85mm equivalent on the X200 Pro. I actually love 85mm, one of my favorite focal lengths, so it's a welcome change for me. And it's 200 megapixel on this one rather than 50 megapixel on this one. So in theory, that extra resolution will get you better results when you crop in further. Will that be the case? We'll find out in just a moment. When it comes to the batteries, 5,400 milliamp hours on the X100 Pro, 6,000 milliamp hours on the X200 Pro. But to be honest, I haven't been crazy impressed with the X200 Pro so far. I think FunTouch might need some more optimization. It'll get me through the day without issue, but I expected a little bit more from a 6,000 milliamp hour cell. So we'll see if that improves. It's still good enough at the minute. And when it comes to charging, weirdly the X200 Pro has had a bit of a downgrade. You got 100 watt wired on the X100 Pro. It's only 90 watt wired on the X200 Pro, and you got 50 watt wireless on the X100 Pro and just 30 watts on the X200 Pro. So still really quick, still really good charging speeds, but a bit weird that we've got a little downgrade there. And yeah, overall really happy with the hardware of this phone, but what we're here for is the cameras. So let's get into the comparison right now. Alright, we're at Nottingham Christmas Market on the selfie camera of these two phones. The Vivo X100 Pro is a little bit wider, as you can see, and you can't zoom in while you're recording. Both of these are recording at 4K 30, but they can do 4K 60 if you prefer. We're using the built-in mic, and hopefully you can hear me because it's kind of loud here, lots going on. Yeah, that's what the selfie cameras look like. Of course, you can use the rear cameras to film yourself as well. You should get a nicer, cleaner image. The Vivo X100 Pro has a larger sensor, so you might see more of a depth of field effect, but it's not a big difference, so it might not be a huge change. So let me know what you think. And of course, you can also use the ultra wide and get a lot more of your surroundings in. This is the kind of effect you get with them. I believe both of these have autofocus, so you should be able to do close-ups as well as wide-angle shots. Okay, quick video zoom test with these two phones. We're standing still on the ultra wide. Now here's the main camera of each. Here's the 2x. Here's the telephotos. Sliding them out to 10x. 10x is the max on the Vivo X100 Pro, but the X200 Pro can go all the way to 20x. And there's how it looks. Okay, quick test of the rack focusing capabilities on these two phones. We're going to use this little sign. We've got an ice rink in the background and we're probably going to have people falling over, which will be great. So here's macro. It looks like the Vivo X100 Pro can't focus that close, so I'll go back a bit. But the X200 can definitely get that close. Oh, there's one. That's about as close as we're getting. There's macro, there's infinity, back to macro, out to infinity, and macro, and we'll do the ultra wide as well. There's macro, there's infinity, macro, and infinity. Right, there's macro on the telephotos of each. Obviously we're at different focal lengths because the X100 Pro has a more zoomed in lens. So there's macro, there's infinity, there's macro, and there's infinity. I definitely think the X200 Pro is a little bit quicker, but both are getting there. Okay, one thing I didn't test at the Christmas market was the cinematic portrait mode, which is now called portrait video on the Vivo X200 Pro. Both of these are set to f4 and we have the natural portrait filter turned on. Both of these can only do up to 1080p, so no 4K in this mode. but I think the effect looks quite good. I always like to test my hand against different backgrounds because often you can get little errors around the fingers, but these both look decent. Okay, another thing we need to test is video stabilization. I'm walking along on the ultra wide of both phones. We're in standard stabilization mode and we're at 4K 30. Now here's a quick jog. Now I'll switch to the main camera of each. Here's walking along normally, and here's a quick jog. Finally, the telephotos of each. Obviously the Vivo X100 Pro is a little bit more zoomed in, but it actually looks more stable on the screen. Maybe that'll change when the video's finished processing. So here's a quick jog. Okay, we're back on the selfie cameras. It's a horrible drizzly evening, and obviously we're not at the Christmas market anymore. It was just too bright and too loud to really get a good comparison there. So we're back on our usual street. And yeah, this is what the selfie cameras look like at night. Now moving on to the rear cameras. Hopefully it should look a bit cleaner. Hopefully we're not getting any splashes on the lenses because it's so drizzly and horrible right now. And now the ultra wides, which I imagine are going to look very similar, but you never know. Pretty similar specs. This is the kind of view you get at night time. Okay, now just a quick stabilization test in low light conditions. We're on the ultra wide of both of these phones and I'm walking along normally. Now here's a quick jog. Now we're on the main camera of each. Here's walking along normally, and here's a quick jog. Now the telephotos of each. Here's walking along normally. Watch out for this curb. And here's a quick jog. Okay, quick video zoom test. Now it's got dark. This is the ultra wide. This is the main camera. This is 2x on each. This is the telephoto of each. The Vivo X100 Pro is at its max, which is 10x. There's 10x on the X200, and we can go all the way to 20x on the X200 Pro. Okay, we're back on my favourite poorly lit street on the selfie cameras, and yeah, it's extremely dark. So how do these selfie cameras look? Probably very similar. And if we switch over to the main rear cameras, things should start to look a bit better. If I face towards the light here, if I turn away and get backlit, there's how that looks. And just because I'm a bit of a completionist, here's the ultra wides, which are gonna look god awful. Okay, now a quick video stabilization test in extremely dark conditions. Here I'm walking along on the ultra wide of both, and here's a quick jog. Moving to the main camera. Here's walking along. Here's a quick jog. Now the telephotos of each. Here's walking along normally, and here's a quick jog. And now just a quick run through standing still. Starting with the telephotos, moving out to the main camera and out to the ultra wide. Before we get into the photos, we've got a quick message from today's sponsor, but don't skip ahead because this is all part of the comparison. This is your first chance to get a look at these phones, full screen 16:9, and we'll be switching back and forth and using different settings throughout the ad read. Settings are down on the screen somewhere down here, so yeah, keep watching and we'll get into the photos in a minute. Making videos like this, I rely on a lot of storage devices. We've got a lot of photos and videos stored on cameras, stored on the hard drive inside my computer, stored on external SSDs, SD cards that go in different cameras, and if just one of these storage devices fails, it could be a major setback. If I've been filming an event, it could mean I have to cancel the project entirely. If the worst happens, Wondershare Recover It is there to save the day. It's an easy to use piece of software that works with both Mac and PC, and it can scan and recover lost files from over 2,000 different devices in over 1,000 different file formats. It works with SD cards and hard drives from brands like Seagate, SanDisk and Western Digital, as well as the files from GoPros, DJI cameras, Sony, Canon, you name it, all the big brands are covered. It now has a 99.5% success rate with external drives, so if the worst happens to you, it's well worth giving this a try. It doesn't matter if you deleted the file by accident or if the hardware corrupted, there's a good chance Recover It can help. The latest version is up to 200% faster than its predecessor, and it's really easy to use. Simply choose the files you want to restore, click Recover and let the software work its magic. Click the link down in the description if you want to try it for yourself. Massive thank you to Wondershare for sponsoring this portion of the video. And without further ado, let's get into the photos. Alright, time for some photos. We're starting with this one, which is a self-portrait taken on the main rear camera of each phone. Obviously we've got the X100 Pro on the left, X200 Pro on the right, and we'll keep it in that orientation throughout the comparison. There's a pretty big difference in colour here, and I don't really like what the X100 Pro's done. I think the X200 Pro looks a lot more natural. Like, my skin is very yellowy. I look a bit jaundiced almost. It's not particularly flattering and not very accurate. Whereas I think my skin tone is just about spot on the X200 Pro shot. It was sunset and there's some warmth coming from the evening sun just falling on my face here. But I definitely think the X200 Pro's got that more true to life. It's very exaggerated on the X100 Pro, same on that brickwork in the background, and same on the grass. I also think the colour of my hoodie is more accurate on the X200 Pro. But aside from colour, what else can we see? We've got a larger sensor on the X100 Pro, but has that made a difference to the image fidelity? Skin texture looks good on both, actually looks a wee bit sharper on the X200 Pro to me. And in terms of the background, it is a little softer, but it's not a dramatic difference. Both get you a nice soft background, slightly more bokeh on the X100 Pro. That f1.57 lens on the X200 Pro is making up for having a smaller sensor, I feel like, and the difference is very, very minimal. Overall, I think the X200 Pro did a better job. Now moving on to the selfie cameras. These have very, very similar specifications, so I wouldn't be surprised to see very similar images. Although I am immediately seeing a difference in colour again. I look too pale on the X100 Pro, whereas I think the skin tones look much more impressive on the X200 Pro. There's more of a blur to the carousel in the background. On the X200 Pro, I think that's motion blur rather than lens blur. These are both fixed focus lenses, so no autofocus, but does that matter? Maybe not, as they both look pretty sharp. X200 Pro is definitely a little bit sharper. Both have a bit of noise in the shadow areas, but I wouldn't say either is dramatically worse than the other. The texture of my hood looks a tiny bit better on the X200 Pro to me, but we're nitpicking. They're really similar, but I do think the X200 Pro pulls ahead, mainly because it has more accurate colours and better skin tones. Now, same shot, but with portrait mode turned on, and I imagine we're not going to see a big difference here using two Vivo phones. Although actually, the X200 Pro has done a slightly better job with the cutout on my hood here. Got some blocking on the X100 Pro shot. Again, slightly better texture on my skin, slightly sharper. I feel like maybe they've changed the focal point of the lens, even though they're both fixed focus lenses. I think the X200 Pro might be in a little bit of a better spot, but the difference is very minor. Skin tones slightly better, but it's really minor. Yeah, both good shots, but I'd give that to the X200 Pro. Okay, now a quick run through of all the lenses at the Christmas market in the daytime. Very overcast day, but I promise it was daylight still, as dim as it was. Seeing a slight difference in colour. There's more of a bluey tone to the sky on the X100 Pro, which I personally quite like. Everything's a little more monochromatic on the X200 Pro. These are both the ultrawides, by the way, which have essentially identical specifications, so we might not see a very big difference here. If we pixel peep a bit, it looks like the X100 Pro is maybe slightly sharper, but it is marginal. I'm talking about this text right here. I think it's sharper on this text. Actually, the background, I think, is sharper on the X200. These are sharper here on the X100, but there's essentially very little difference here. Very little difference in color and very little difference in sharpness and noise. So yeah, you're basically getting the same thing. Moving on to the main cameras, where we might see a bigger difference with the different sensor sizes. This time the X200 Pro has brought out the blues in the sky a little more, and they've kind of been lost a little bit on the X100 Pro. This signage is very slightly sharper on the X200 Pro, although we might have slightly better dynamic range on the X100 Pro, because you can see the shape of these lights. Although I don't know if I like that really. I think the X200 Pro looks more natural with just them being glowing orbs, which is more like what I saw with my eyes. Slightly darker overall exposure, but maybe slightly more natural. I think the focal point is different on both. I feel like the X100 Pro focused around here. That's a little soft, but the background is sharper. Either way, very minor differences here. It's all a matter of preference. I think, I mean, they're almost identical. Too close to call for me. Now finally the telephoto lenses, which obviously the X100 Pro has a more zoomed in lens, 100mm equivalent, and you get an 85mm equivalent on the X200 Pro. Seeing that same thing with the dynamic range, you can see like the insides of the bulbs on this projector thing, whereas that detail has been lost on the X200 Pro. Does that matter? Probably not, but interesting to note nonetheless. Although if we look over here, look at this beam and these bolts, miles sharper. Actually miles sharper on the X200 Pro. Same with this, the texture and the wood up here. That's interesting because the X100 Pro is more zoomed in. So you'd think you'd pick up these tiny details a little bit better because, you know, you're so much closer to the subject. But that big old sensor on the X200 Pro is really working some magic. That's impressive. I also like that the lens flares look a little bit more natural. You always get this, like, how do I describe that? Like an equals sign with an extra line. You get this triple line flare with light sources on the X100 Pro's telephoto. And maybe that's there to an extent on the X200 Pro, but it's a much lesser extent. You tend to get more of like a cross-hatched pattern that looks a lot more natural to me. Yeah, that's not close for me. The detail's miles better on the X200 Pro. Okay, now we've got two portrait shots on the main lenses. Both of these have the vintage filter applied, which I absolutely love. It looks brilliant. And looks like we may have selected a slightly different blur strength, but the end result isn't really that much different. Off the bat, I'm not seeing any major differences other than the angle of the shot because I was holding the phone side by side. Let's take a zoom in. X200 Pro looks marginally sharper. Actually quite a bit sharper because I can see the individual brush strokes where the eye has been painted here, and I can almost see them on the X100 Pro, but it's just not quite as clear or quite as sharp. Same with the dust on the brim of this hat. That's a little softer on the X100 Pro. Yeah, same throughout. Look at the texture of that paint. That's gorgeous. So both really good, both very similar at a glance, but if you pixel peep, the X200 Pro did a better job there. Now same thing, but 85mm, so for the X100 Pro, that's a crop from the main sensor, whereas the X200 Pro is using its native telephoto lens. And apologies, I don't know what happened, but we are at different blur strengths again. We've got a higher blur strength on the X100 Pro, but we can still look at the details and see the difference. I do love that bokeh effect they've created. Vivo's portrait effects are very good, and I think they work especially well with telephoto shots, even though this is a simulated telephoto shot, but you get the point. Not really a fair fight here. With the native telephoto, we are getting much better detail, and some of that is there on the X100 Pro, but we're doing a pretty big crop, and so you get more softness to the details. Like you can see these individual fibers on the nutcracker's face, but they're not sharp like they are on the X200 Pro. Not really a fair fight, but regardless, at 85mm, the 85mm lens looks better. Okay, now here's another ultra-wide shot, this time with this cool windmill German sausage stand thing. Not expecting to see any major differences here. These cameras do have very similar specifications, but let's check. I think marginally better sharpness on the face of this guy. Who is this guy? He's from the Bible. Joseph Shepherd, not sure. Anyway, I would say tiny bit sharper on the X200, but elsewhere there's really not a lot in it. The ultra-wides are never very sharp towards the edge of the frame. That's the same on all phones really. These are pretty much identical. Now moving on to the main lenses of each. There's a pretty big difference in exposure here, with our shepherd character looking pretty shadowy on the X100 Pro. I don't dislike it. I think it's a very nice image overall, but the exposure maybe is slightly more balanced on the X200 Pro. I also think the dynamic range might be slightly better. I'm seeing more detail in these clouds, or at least better contrast in these clouds compared to the X100 Pro. It's still there, but it's less pronounced. To be fair, that's down to personal preference if you like that or not. We've got a weird vertical striping pattern on our shepherd guy. Not sure what's causing that. Is that an artifact, or it looks like it might be some kind of artifact because it's, I don't know. It could be the flicker of the LED lighting. I'm not really sure, but regardless, it's not there on the X200 Pro. And I also think this sign in the foreground looks better, possibly just because the exposure is a bit better. I feel like I can see more detail in the painting of this sign. It looks like it might be hand painted, whereas it's just a little bit harder to see on the X100 Pro just because it's not as bright. But it's possible you might be able to bring that up and it might be just as good. Again, really, really close, but the X200 Pro edges ahead. Okay, so now we're going to test the maximum zoom of these two phones. Well, we'll test a few different focal lengths first, but this is just an establishing shot to let you know where we're taking the image from. We're going to be zooming in on this electricity pylon in the distance. So I just took the shot to give you some context to show you how far we're zooming. It is a very long way away. So first we'll look at 20 times zoom, and that is a pretty big zoom. We're pretty close in on this electricity pylon already. There's quite a difference between the two images. The X100 Pro has really brought up the brightness of these trees in the foreground. They're a bit more muddied on the X200 Pro, I would say. And I feel like I can see the sunlight on the pylon a little better. If we zoom in and look at the details, neither are looking too great, but I think the X200 Pro looks a little cleaner. It's a little more contrasty, it's a little sharper, but there's also a little more consistency, like with the size of these, I don't know what they're called, these spine things running down. They're kind of a more uniform shape, whereas they're kind of a bit oil painting-y on the X100 Pro. Same with this. These supports that kind of intersect here, they look pretty bad. And the thickness of the lines here is not so good. So I think if you zoom in a bit closer, the X200 Pro does a slightly better job, but neither of these look too great. And of course, at maximum zoom, they look even worse. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing here. More contrast and slightly sharper on the X200 Pro, which I think results in a better overall image. But this is 100 times zoom. It was never going to look great, and I wouldn't really recommend zooming this far on either of these phones. But if you want to, this is the kind of image you get. Not bad, but also not really usable. Okay, now we've got a couple indoor shots from a cat cafe we went to, and these were taken in portrait mode, but with the artificial bokeh effect turned off, where it says we're set to f16, which basically means you're just getting the natural lens blur that the lens truly creates. But we do have the vintage filter turned on, and we're on the telephotos. So again, the X100 Pro is a little more zoomed in. Both are very good. Both have nailed the focus around the eye, I think. But I would say the X200 Pro is a little bit sharper, and I feel like better detail in the cat's fur. The colors are different, and honestly, I couldn't tell you which one is more accurate. Kind of leaning towards the X100 Pro for color accuracy. It was a light colored cat, but then the lighting was a little warm, so it's fair enough that the X200 Pro is a little bit warmer. Kind of too close to call, both very good in my opinion. Now another cat, and both of these were taken at 100mm. That's the actual telephoto length on the X100 Pro, whereas the X200 Pro has cropped in slightly on its 85mm equivalent lens. And I will say this photo was easier to take on the X200 Pro because they've really improved the autofocus algorithms and does eye detection even on cats. Obviously it does it on people as well, but it instantly locked focus where I had to tap a couple of times on the X100 Pro to get it to focus, but it looks like it got there. The X200 Pro is way sharper and the fur looks more natural. I feel like there's some contrast and sharpening going on, or maybe denoising on the X100 Pro. It just muddies the detail of the fur a little bit. It looks a little bit less natural. Still a good shot, but just everything's very slightly soft. Whereas the X200 Pro just did a better job here. Okay, moving on to nighttime shots now. These are on the main lens. It looks like I got my finger in the shot slightly on the X200 Pro, but we'll ignore that. Much darker exposure from the X100 Pro, way darker in the skies and in the building in the distance. Everything's been brought up more on the X200 Pro. To be honest, the X100 Pro is a little more accurate to what I saw with my eyes, but I like what the X200 Pro's done. Again, we're seeing higher contrast and maybe a little more sharpening on the X100 Pro. Bit of a softer image on the X200 Pro, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that looks a little more natural. A little bit like the shots we got from the Huawei Pure 70 Ultra, where there's just a little bit less sharpening, which makes it look a little bit less smartphony. And you can see the advantage of that here, because the texture of the top of this tram just looks a little bit better to me. Whereas, yeah, there's just some muddying of the details on the X100 Pro. This Ferris wheel is sharper as well, and I like the slight halation we're getting from the light sources on the side of each cable car type thing. They look a bit flatter and less illuminated on the X100 Pro, and everything is just slightly soft. Yeah, this one, I'd say this one's close, but I do prefer the X200 Pro. I like that you can see the I don't know what any of these things are called. The electricity thing on top of the tram. You can't see that, it's all in the shadow on the X100 Pro is what I'm trying to say. Now this is on the ultra wide from the same spot. And again, my finger's in the shot, but we'll ignore that. These look really similar at a glance. This time, our exposure is almost identical. Less of a lens flare on the X200 Pro. So this is a tangent, but there's been so many people on Reddit talking about the massive lens flares they're getting on the X200 Pro. And so far, I don't know if I've just been lucky. I don't know if they fixed something. I haven't seen any in my photos. So we'll keep an eye out as we keep looking at these nighttime photos, but I haven't had any issues with lens flare, personally. If we zoom in a bit, both a bit mushy. It's an ultra wide in low light. That's what we expect. The clock is way sharper on the X100 Pro, but I think that's a processing thing. It looks very stamped on because everything is quite soft, but the details on the clock are sharper. Everything's a little sharper. It just feels like the sharpening slider is set a little higher. Very slightly more noise in the shadows, but overall, I feel like that sharpening has helped in this situation. So I'd give this one to the X100 Pro, but they're really, really close. Now the telephotos, zooming in on this purple tower in the distance. Slightly brighter overall exposure on the X100 Pro. Very similar colors. Slightly more saturated purples on the X100 Pro. A little more muted on the X200 Pro. Oh, that's quite a big difference. Yeah, when you zoom in, look at these statues. There's way more detail. Even though they're further away on the X200 Pro, you can see way more detail. And you can see texture in these columns in the background, whereas that's all gone. It's all oil painting-y on the X100 Pro. Same for the top of the dome and the surround of the clock. No contest. This 85mm lens on the X200 Pro is an absolute banger. I don't know how much can be attributed to the massive megapixel count. Probably not that much, to be honest, but that big sensor size really does make a difference. Now zooming in further, this is 10x, and you'd expect the X100 Pro to do better because it has a longer reach, like the lens is physically more zoomed in. But no, we're seeing the same thing. Detail's way better. I mean, neither of these are perfect, but the detail's way, way better on the X200 Pro. Now this one, both were set to 100mm, so same thing as before. It's the native focal length of the telephoto on the X100 Pro, and the X200 Pro's digitally cropped slightly. Pretty big difference in exposure. Overall, I would say the X200 Pro is a little better balanced. The white fur of the reindeer looks a little overexposed to me on the X100 Pro, but both look pretty similar otherwise. The X200 Pro is sharper as well. Around the eye of this reindeer, everything is a little sharper with a little more texture to it. Both are good, but the X200 Pro is slightly better. Now this is a main lens shot on each, and you get some context. The reindeer was on the roof, and now I'm zoomed out. Some difference in color, definitely warmer on the X200 Pro. Everything's a little cooler. I'm just trying to figure out which one's more accurate. The lighting was warm, so I feel like the X200 Pro is probably more true to life. Although if we're looking for what color of red the products were, maybe the X100 Pro. Yes, it's a tricky one. This is a tricky one. In terms of the details, both very sharp, maybe slightly sharper on the X100 Pro looking at this text up here. Wow, got some serious dreadlocks on this person here. The text is more legible on the X100 Pro. I feel like the reds are clipping more on the X200 Pro than they are on the X100. These people look a little cleaner, a little sharper on the X100 as well, but they're not really the focal point of our image. So, and the Ferris wheel on the distance looks better on the X100 Pro as well. It is close. It's close, but I think the X100 Pro is better, although I would warm it up very slightly to make it more true to life. Okay, nighttime selfies now. I feel like I'm seeing less of a difference in color at night. These both look quite similar to me, like skin tone wise. The X100 Pro is a lot sharper for some reason, and the detail on my jacket looks better. The zip looks sharper. Everything looks a bit sharper. It's almost like there's some motion blur or smoothing on my skin. So yeah, I think the X100 Pro did a better job here. Kind of surprising because the hardware is like the same, but for whatever reason, it looks like the X100 Pro did better. And now the same shots with portrait mode turned on. Are we going to see the same thing? Very possibly. It looks like it at a glance actually. Exactly the same thing. Almost looks like there's a little bit of motion blur on the X200 Pro. Just a loss of detail in my skin. Much sharper on the X100 Pro. Cutout looks to be about the same. Both did a really good job. Both did nice blur effects. But yeah, X100 Pro, sharper. Now these two were taken on the main rear cameras, and there's a much bigger difference. Again, having that problem with the ghostly skin tones. Bit yellowish, very pale, really natural. That the X200 Pro looks like what I think I look like in real life. Both are very sharp, but I think the texture of my skin looks more natural. Yeah, everything just looks a little more natural on the X200 Pro shot. I think the contrast or sharpening is maybe slightly too high on the X100 Pro. And as I said before, we got a larger sensor on the X100 Pro, so you would expect the background to be blurrier. There's really not much of a difference. And I would actually say the sharpening on these out of focus areas has made it look a little busy. It's just a more natural softness on the X200 Pro. No contest for me. I much prefer the X200 Pro shot. Both are good, but that's better. Okay, now it's time for some photos from the really dark street that you saw in the video section. Pretty big difference in color here. The Vivo X100 Pro has kind of got a bit of a green shift to it, whereas I think the X200 Pro is a bit more accurate. The lighting is cold, and it looks cold on this shot here. Without zooming in, I can see more noise and some blocking and artifacting in the sky on the X100 Pro shot, whereas the X200 Pro looks a bit cleaner. Both have a massive lens flare in the exact same pattern. And there's kind of a weird distracting shimmer on the X200 Pro. Not sure what's happened there. But either way, the end result is quite similar. If we zoom in, the X200 Pro shot's definitely a little bit cleaner. And the brickwork is much sharper on this wall over here. This is really noisy. The bin, it's kind of disappeared. Whereas you can see a lot more. You can see the shape of the curb and everything here. Similar shots, but it's much better on the X200 Pro. Now the main lens of each. And again, going back to that lens flare thing, the lens flare is bigger and worse on the X100 Pro here. It's really not much of a problem for me on the X200 Pro. Not saying it's not a thing for anyone, but maybe I got lucky. I'm not having any lens flare issues at all. This time the colors are much more similar and the detail's very good on both. But the X200 Pro looks a little bit sharper. Like this number looks like a 25. On this wall here. It's harder to read on the X100 Pro. Bit noisier. Maybe it's just improvements in the image processing, but whatever Vivo's doing, it's working, and the X200 Pro looks better. Finally, telephoto shots on the same street, and right off the bat, I'm seeing that thing again with the horizontal lines from the telephoto sensor. Don't really like that, and it's much less noticeable on the X200 Pro. Although what I do like is the blue in the sky, which is a very Vivo thing. There's less of it. Yes, there's more magenta tones in the sky on the X200 Pro, which I kind of think is a shame. I like that blue tone in the sky. Let's zoom in. Both are pretty good, but I would say the X200 Pro just looks marginally sharper. Both have got some artifacts on this number plate from sharpening, but something about these bushes looks a little more natural, and the texture of the road up here definitely looks better. And like I said, that lens flare is just kind of gross. So yeah, for me, X200 Pro. Okay, I think that about wraps up our test for this one. So final thoughts, is the Vivo X200 Pro worth getting if you've already got the X100 Pro? And for me, the answer is a resounding yes. The main reason is that 85mm equivalent telephoto with its massive sensor takes gorgeous photos, takes brilliant videos. It's amazing in low light can focus extremely close. I just love it. I'm completely addicted to that lens. I've been using it all the time. The autofocus is way better, and that's true of the telephoto and on the main sensor. You get buttery smooth 4K 120 slow motion, which looks excellent, and log recording, which I've not played with too much, but so far seems very good. So much better for video. Plus there's the new screen, which I like way better. The battery's bigger and it's faster. All great things, all worthy of an upgrade in my opinion. The main things I was worried about are the step down from the 1-inch type sensor to the 1/1.28. I thought it was going to be a big downgrade. Turns out not so much. It looks pretty much as good. The backgrounds are almost as blurry, if not as blurry, and it performs great in low light. And the other thing I was worried about is this lens flare issue people keep talking about, but I haven't experienced it at all. I mean, you've seen all my test photos and videos. I didn't see it, so maybe they fixed it for the global release, or maybe I just got lucky. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal. Of course, this is all subjective. You might feel differently. So let me know in the comments which one you thought won. And stay tuned, because there's always more phones on the way, and I'll catch you in the next one. Doodles.